So welcome again. We're really delighted to have you here this evening as part of the monthly fireside. So tonight we have a talk by Neda, or a presentation by Neda Etemad Spinden on the topic of the journey to oneness. And Neda is joining us. Currently, she's in London, Ontario, but she lives in Sacramento, California. She has a bachelor's degree of engineering science and is currently pursuing her master's of business administration, focused on leadership and analytics. She works in the water industry in California and is very focused on offering volunteer service to her neighborhood, really focused on creating spaces where children and youth of the neighborhood can come together and channel their energies in positive ways to contribute to the neighborhood and their community at large. So I pass it on to you, Neda.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. And it's really heartwarming for me to be here today because I see some very old friends and I'm very excited to get to know some very new people. I'm just going to try to share my screen. I'll ask you to bear with me. I'm not the most tech savvy individual. Hopefully you can see this. And I'd just like to start today with something that's called the parable of the stone cutters. And that's, it's a parable that was made popular. You may have heard of it before. Peter Drucker reintroduced it into our discourses in the mid-70s. And the parable of the rock crusher goes like this, that there was some rock crushers laboring away at their job. A gentleman approached one of them and said, "Excuse me, I just want to ask, do you like your job?" And the rock crusher looked at him and said, "All day I take these big rocks, I crush them into little rocks. I spend the entire day doing the same thing in the heat of the sun. And you come and ask me if I like my job? I don't like my job." He said, "It's monotonous, it's hot, and it's nothing enjoyable." And the gentleman said, "Okay," and actually moved on to the second rock crusher he found. And he asked him the same question. He said, "I wonder, do you like your job?" And the second rock crusher looked at him and said, "I love my job. Every day I take large stones, I put them into small stones, and I build this beautiful cathedral that you see coming to life here. And I know for future generations, people will come here and praise the Lord. Of course I love my job. What could be better than this?" And so this is an illustrative example that I think we can learn a lot from, but the main lesson is that our perspective matters, and perspective is important, and perspective will dictate how we think about things, and if we can actually see the reality both of our own endeavors and the reality of the society and the communities in which we live. And so with that lesson in mind, I'd just like to review a little bit about the three things I'm hoping to discuss today. It's about a 20-minute presentation, maybe a little bit less. We're going to talk about this journey that's, of course, the title of the presentation, The Journey to Oneness. I'd like to discuss how the revelation of Baha'u'llah has described the future of society, the future of this world in which we live, and also mention a little bit about the worldwide experience of the Baha'i community in this sphere and the change in culture which has been experienced as a result of its effort, and just share some of the learning that's been achieved and some of the conceptual framework that the Baha'is operate under. So if we start with the conception of the journey to oneness, we can really think that oneness is this idea of being able to come together, not in uniformity, but as a group of people really dedicated to the advancement of everyone. Today, the human race is passing through a period of turbulent adolescence, moving toward the next stage in its life. That stage can be described as one of maturity, characterized by the emergence of a united global civilization. Our well-being, our peace and security are all dependent upon the firm establishment of unity. And so we can see this is very much the bedrock upon which that we function under. And nothing, I think, has been more apparent to us than with this experience of the global pandemic, really showing us how connected we really are and how the actions of one can influence the other so quickly. And now I wondered, in this idea of, where we're at as a human society, everything that's going on around us in our communities and neighborhoods, I wondered if we could take a minute, and if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourselves, I'd like to hear a little bit from everyone about what is the kind of world in which you would want to live. If we had to describe it, its characteristics, what it looks like, what it feels like, what is the atmosphere in the world in you would want to live? And you don't have to raise your hands. Feel free to just speak up and we can hear from anyone who wishes to share.
I think that a world where every person matters and every person is allowed to show their gifts to and be appreciated for who they are.
Mm-hmm.
I think, well, that's a good start for me.
That's a wonderful start. Thank you. Who else has something to share about the kind of world you would want to live in?
My name's Eileen, and I'd like to say that I would like to see a more peaceful world where we cooperate with each other rather than destroy or divide.
That's right. Perfect. That sounds good. Are there any other thoughts?
I think for me, I think I'd like to live in a world where we appreciate all the good things that we have, all the potentiality, all the wonder and mystery that goes into having ever been created and existed. And here we are able to make our choices about it. And fortunately, with some very good guidelines and information.
It sounds wonderful. Juan, I noticed you had unmuted. Was there something you'd like to share? We'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, Neda. Yes. Well, more or less in the same lines, I was thinking on a joyful world. Like when we're kids. When we're kids, we don't have any fear of what is the other person going to say about me. We can be authentic. We can be ourselves. We are joyful. And I think those characteristics, like authentic and joyful, is something that probably we long for.
Beautiful. Those are all wonderful, wonderful things. I'm glad. Thank you all for sharing. I do appreciate that very much. So if we think about the world we would want to live in, and as you've mentioned, it can be a world that's described in the Baha'i writings, which has an environment that is unifying and cooperative, where ties of fellowship bind us together, where criticism of others is avoided and backbiting and gossip are replaced with mutual support and encouragement. This is a world in which young and old work together, shoulder to shoulder, accompanying one another in their efforts, helping each other. In this kind of world, children are reared through an educational process that strives to sharpen their abilities and imbue them with the spirit of service to others. And young people are helped to identify their own talents and abilities, answering the age-old question of what do you want to be when you grow up? They're assisted to find these talents and gain confidence in their abilities and cultivate their potential, directing their energies towards the betterment of their environment. Like we said, this is a world where everyone has a place and is valued and has a seat at the table. A world in which institutions strive to ensure that an environment is fostered like the one described here, and attention is focused on encouragement, assistance, counsel, and education. So we can see a world like that might look like the one in the picture here. And we can see that the environment we've described calls for a different set of dynamics than the one found in the highly individualistic society that we live in today, which promotes divisiveness and encourages us to seek a camp, a group of people that is usually pro something or anti something else, identifying ourselves only with this and taking a stand against some other group and using that as the basis of our identity. Instead, what we want is a cooperative environment, and that's what the revelation of Baha'u'llah has described. And I think we can agree, just like we described, it sounds pretty good. Baha'u'llah has said in a tablet that no two men can be found who may be said to be outwardly and inwardly united. The evidences of discord and malice are apparent everywhere, though all were made for harmony and union. He goes on to say, how long will humanity persist in its waywardness? How long will injustice continue? How long is chaos and confusion to reign amongst men? How long will discord agitate the face of society? The winds of despair are, alas, blowing from every direction, and the strife that divideth and afflicted the human race is daily increasing. And of course, we don't have to look very far to see the evidence of these words in the life that we live right now. The extraordinary thing is that with the revelation of Baha'u'llah, what has seemed previously impossible has now been able to become possible. And that's the coming together of the people of the world in a spirit of unity, cooperation, and oneness. The actual coming together of people, both inwardly and outwardly united. This spirit of coming together, the act of coming together, is what actually provides the impetus of progress of society, and can now be seen both at the micro level in neighborhoods and villages, and also at the macro level, looking at the global scale. And the way this has been accomplished is that because Baha'u'llah has gone on to say that it calls for a complete reorganization of human affairs in order to achieve this unity, the worldwide Baha'i community has been able to actually gain a lot of experience in the last 20 years with methods and tools that help us bring the society building power of the revelation of Baha'u'llah into reality. The results that we're now seeing were unseen and unheard of before, and they're leading to this oneness. And the tools, methods that I'm referring to here are encompassed in something that's referred to as the Training Institute. It's also called the Ruhi Institute. What we have seen over the last 20 years with the Training Institute is quite simply an accomplishment of tremendous proportions. There's a system of distance education that has been developed in country after country, the principal elements of which include the study circle, the tutor, and the curriculum of the Ruhi Institute. With this, the worldwide Baha'i community has acquired the capacity to enable millions to study the concepts of the oneness of humanity based on the writings of Baha'u'llah in small groups with the explicit purpose of translating the Baha'i teachings into reality. Very simply put, it's a group of friends who come together with the express purpose of bettering their communities. When Baha'u'llah sent forth his glad tidings, the devoted believers who could carry his message to humanity were very few in number. Today, the devotion of the Baha'is is undimmed, and the number of those working for the betterment of the world has soared. Not only has the work of the Training Institute been beneficial for Baha'i communities, but its value in assisting the spiritual and material progress of communities was quickly realized, and its doors were open to members of all faiths and all backgrounds, seeing that whether or not somebody chooses to enroll in the Baha'i community, the truths enshrined in the writings of Baha'u'llah and their implications on the life of the individual are universal to everyone. These teachings, which the Training Institute have been based upon, promote a particular framework under which it operates. And I think it's important to understand some of the elements of this framework. First and foremost is the idea of the concept of the oneness of humanity. The oneness of humankind is, after all, the pivot around which all the teachings of Baha'u'llah revolve, and is at once its operating principle and ultimate goal of the Baha'i faith. And this is interesting, that something can be the operating principle and the ultimate goal. So those that study these courses quickly learn that conflict and contention are categorically forbidden by God, and that one of the best things we can do in any situation is build unity. In its efforts to understand and contribute to a process of social change, the Institute tries to avoid two sets of theories that have historically dominated the discourses on the idea of change and progress. On the one hand, it disagrees with the concept of social change that is entirely based on the individualistic approach. This means that these programs analyze society in terms of psychological makeup, the skills and behavior of the individual, and assume that social structures somehow change by themselves after an individual has been saved or correctly trained through religious conversion or secular education. That's one side of the spectrum. On the other hand, the Institute also rejects this popular notion that a human being is entirely a product of society, and that no improvement is possible unless social structures, especially those related to political and economic power, are changed first. Both of these extremes we can see very visibly in many of the events that have happened in the recent past, just in the last 2 or 3 years, and we can analyze the underlying concepts behind some of the movements that we may be familiar with as leaning much more towards one of these than the other. Now, what the Institute does do, which is very different than either of these two extremes, it tries to understand the process of transformation of human society in terms of a complex set of interactions between two parallel developments. That is, number one, the transformation of the individual, and number two, the deliberate creation of structures of a new society. These two are actually complementary and move forward together. It does not view the individual as a human being and just a product of interactions with nature and society, and it does not identify structural change only with political and economic processes. So the Institute has a much broader outlook. It sees the necessity of change in all structures, including mental, cultural, scientific, and technological, educational, economic, and social. It includes a complete change in the very concepts of political leadership and power. It's understood that individuals, all of whom possess a more or less developed spiritual nature, may be illumined by divine teachings. These individuals are no means perfect, but try to walk a path of social transformation, a path which is nevertheless not one of individual salvation, but one that implies constant effort to create and strengthen the institutions of a new social order. The image here is the logo of the Institute process, and you can see even in the logo, there are people of a variety of backgrounds and ages working together in inviting others onto the path continuously. So all of that are foundational to the Institute. So briefly, to be a participant in the Institute just implies that action is required, and that this action is based on the inherent concept of the oneness of the human race. And the Institute takes this large and beautiful concept and puts it to work in one's daily life through a specific set of activities. These activities include neighborhood activities for children, groups where junior youth can gather together to think about their talents and abilities and how to build skills for service and leadership, and also groups where youth and adults can gather together in a spiritual environment and work for the betterment of their communities. Now, an example of this that I witnessed was an individual who was perhaps 18 or 19 years old and began serving as an animator of junior youth. It means they had a group of 11 to 15-year-olds from the neighborhood come together. And the individual who was serving as an animator means basically your role is to be a mentor or a wise and loving friend to those in the younger generations. As he was talking to the junior youth about the importance of honesty and truthfulness, the importance of never stealing, he then took the opportunity to analyze his own life and realized that if he was in a position to be teaching younger generations about this, that meant that he had to exercise absolute truthfulness and absolute honesty. which for him in his life meant that he had to stop, he realized, streaming things illegally or pirating videos and things like that that are very popular in culture. And this one example always served to me as a concrete example of how the Institute process not only changed the individual, but also helped the whole group advance, because then this individual would then tell his junior youth about the changes he was making in his life as a result of being in the program. So hopefully that made sense. So another important element of the conceptual framework of the Institute is the conception of participation. Although by now, most programs are concerned with development and change, accept the importance of participation of the local community in its own path of development. And most try to avoid imposing their own projects and ideas. However, the current state of things is that there is very little clarity and agreement as to the nature, the form, and the extent of which participation from the local inhabitants is required. Again, the Institute asserts a very different point of view and asks that participation, and this is a special kind of participation, it's one that does not degenerate into political manipulation, but that this kind of participation requires a systematic learning process within each community or region so that the community itself experiments with new ideas, new methods, new technologies and procedures, rather than being the object of social experimentation by others. Where we have seen examples of this flourish is communities that have come together in a spirit of learning. First and foremost, establishing the rhythm of study and service introduced in the first series of 7 courses of the Institute. Following this, these first 7 courses, they're able to build a series of habits of thought, of abilities to be able to analyze and really look at underlying assumptions. And for example, a community might look at a particular technology and consult together on the underlying assumptions of this technology and then decide whether it would be useful for them to apply it or not. And so the notion of technology for technology's sake then disappears entirely, and the community is able to then take charge of their own development with the values that are important to them. So guided by universal participation, both as a principle and a goal, the Institute tries to design and carry out educational activities that combine 2 things: classroom learning and personal study with acts of service in the community. Each educational activity is in itself an enabling experience, which helps participants develop certain qualities, attitudes, capabilities, and skills, and become a new type of social actor where their energies are entirely directed towards promoting the well-being of their community, and whose actions are inspired by the vision of a new world civilization, which will embody in all its structures and processes the fundamental principles of unity of the human race. At this point, this always brings to mind a particular example where in a small village, a very modest children's class had started. So a children's class of just 4 or 5 neighborhood kids under the age of about 10 that come together to think about the virtues that are required in their lives. So to think about honesty, to think about politeness, to think about kindness to animals, obedience to parents. And as it happened after a few short months, their teacher was called away and had to leave that particular locality. Now, when we talk about the Institute is able to nurture a particular kind of social actor, what happened in this children's class was that the oldest girl of the small group, the 10-year-old, decided that it was actually unacceptable that their children's class would cease to exist even if their teacher left. So the 10-year-old would then assemble her little group of friends without telling any of the other adults and continued to go forward with the children's class, actually conceiving of herself as the teacher now and able to bring her little friends along on this journey. And it was later that the adults figured out what was going on and were able to help them again conduct a children's class. There's another story, and I had the pleasure of serving as an animator for a junior youth group for some time in one of the communities where I lived, where a young 14, 15-year-old girl had come through the program for a short period of time, 3 or 4 months when I knew her. Then she turned 15, and this is a program, again, that's aimed at thinking about, a junior youth is thinking about their own natural talents and abilities, learning leadership skills, and learning to be able to use their talents for the betterment of the community. Now, as she turned 15, a series of global youth conferences were called. She boarded a bus and traveled with 30 other young people several hours away for 3 days for a youth conference. She came back. Once she came back, her parents approached me and said, we just want to ask how she did when she was there. And I said she did just fine. She was doing really well. The parents then shared with me that actually this particular junior youth suffered from extreme social anxiety and had ceased to go to school for several months. Now, the environment that's created in a junior youth group is very different than the environment in school. And I had not seen any indication that this girl would be unable to, or was in any way uneasy in the environment of the junior youth group. And in fact, I was quite shocked that she had ceased going to school because it was too difficult. That environment was not helping her thrive, but it was instead the junior youth group, something that was based on service to the community that was able to release her from this social anxiety. So we've seen lots of cases like that as well, where these kinds of programs actually help with the very strong forces that are currently acting on young people in society today. Now, the Institute accomplishes the task of uniting people, and does this through painting a vivid picture of what the world can be. It builds skills for service, and it helps us remove the forces and the pressures towards lethargy and apathy. It uses understanding as a source of motivation. And I just wanted to say a few words about the exact purpose of the Ruhi Institute. And sometimes there might be a misunderstanding about the purpose and the aims of the Ruhi Institute and the Institute courses and the Training Institute process. And an example that was, I should say this first, that the misunderstanding that might occur is that sometimes we think that the Ruhi Institute, because it is based on the quotations of Baha'u'llah, that is actually the purpose, is to learn about the Baha'i faith, of which Baha'u'llah is the manifestation of God and has presented the Baha'i faith. However, this is a little bit of a misunderstanding of the purpose of the Ruhi Institute. And the example that was given to me that I found very clarifying was that of a glass of water that I can put on the table. And there are many things that we can say to describe this glass. We can say it's transparent. We can say it reflects maybe the light of the sun a particular way. We can say it allows me to see things behind it in a particular way. It's tall. All of those statements are true. But the actual purpose of the glass is to carry water so I can have a drink. That's its primary purpose. And while it is possible to learn about the Baha'i faith by engaging in the Training Institute courses and going through the Ruhi Institute curriculum, that's not its primary purpose. The primary purpose is to help us see ourselves as this one humanity, this one human family, and engage in actions that actually support that. So it's no longer just a lofty and noble idea. And at this point, I just want to share maybe one more story about the change in culture that occurs at the level of a neighborhood that does engage in the Ruhi Institute. And this story comes from, again, a community that I lived in where we had just started a junior youth group, and there was a youth who would travel to come to our home to help us assemble the children of the neighborhood and think about service ideas and think about how to make our neighborhood a better place. And it had only been going on a short time. And one day this youth came and she accidentally locked her keys in her car and was quite distressed at this experience. And she thought, what should I do? She lived very far away. She didn't have anyone who could bring her an extra set of keys, and she was in tears. Suddenly, an elderly man appeared and he said, what's wrong? And she said, well, this is what's happened. I've locked my keys. I don't know what to do. And he said, not a problem. He said, these are my keys. This is my car. Why don't you take my car and go home and get your keys and come back? And she was shocked. She didn't know this man, had never seen him before. And she said, well, I live very far. Maybe you can't, like me, I need the car might take me over an hour to get back here. He said, don't worry. I actually can see you from my balcony. I see that you come here every week. I see that you work with these kids and that you do service. You clean up the neighborhood. You bring the children together. You teach them things. I can see everything that you're doing. I know what kind of person you are. And we can see even with a small junior youth group in the Training Institute, that actually it starts to influence the culture all around the children, whether or not they even are parents or even directly related to the group that's functioning. And so this was very much a cursory review of the experiences of the Baha'i community, maybe just of a single Baha'i. And just to say the Institute process is rooted here in London as well and surrounding areas. So if you haven't taken a book recently, if you are on the path, but you're stuck, or if you're thinking of what you can do to then do the acts of service, this might be your golden opportunity to take your next step forward on this path. So I appreciate all your time and I appreciate you being here. And I just wanted to share a song actually here at the end that actually, it does very much embody many of the concepts we've been talking about. And hopefully I'll be able to share the audio correctly, and just bear with me, and that'll be the end of the talk, and then we can go into the discussion.
Let all associate, therefore, in this great human garden, even as flowers grow and blend together side by side. Love ye all religions and all races with a love that is true, true and sincere, and show that love through deeds, and show that love. Let all associate, therefore, in this great human garden, even as flowers grow and blend together side by side. The tongue of grandeur hath however in the day of his manifestation proclaimed it is not his to boast who loveth his country, but it is his who loveth the world. Love ye all religions and all races with a love that is true, true and sincere, and show that love through deeds, and show that love. Let all associate, this great human garden, even as flowers grow and blend together side by side. Let all associate, therefore, in this great human garden, even as flowers grow and blend together side by side. Even as flowers grow and blend together side by side by side.
Thank you very much, Neda, for your presentation on the journey to oneness, and specifically focusing on the importance of the Training Institute and the impact that it's had on the communities you've lived in.